Hello and welcome to Sensational She-Geek live from Yancy Street's first podcast special episode covering the first episode of Superman and Lois on the CW. This episode premiered last Tuesday the 23rd, and as the second episode will be premiering tomorrow, Tuesday the 2nd, I figure I should probably get to recording this podcast episode as I really enjoyed this episode. This TV show I think is going to be really interesting. I think I'm probably going to stick through it for the whole season. We'll see how tomorrow's episode 2 goes, but if it goes anything like episode 1, I was severely impressed with everything that they brought to the show here, and I can't wait to talk about it and get you on board, hopefully, with watching it as well. Now, before we get started, I feel like I should probably mention who is starring as the main characters in this show. We have Tyler Hoechlin. I have no idea how to say that, but his name is Tyler, and he plays Superman. Bitsy Tulloch plays Lois Lane, and then they have two sons in this show. They are... Oh, wow, they're not brothers. I really thought they were brothers because they look strangely similar, at least I think they do. Jordan Elsas and Alexander Garfin. And then Lana Lang shows up in the show, and she is Emmanuel Shrieky. Well, she was in... Gosh, she was in whatever that show was in the early 2000s. I'm clicking on her name so it will probably show up. Entourage, that's the show. She was in Entourage as somebody's wife, who I think ends up divorcing him in the end. But anyway, that is the cast as it is so far for the main cast, so let's go ahead and get started. I was really impressed with how this all went from the very start. It's surprisingly, it's good. It's really good. So it starts with a voiceover of Clark. He's talking about coming to Earth for the first time, the things that he remembers, the moments that changed him. And he says he always remembers loving Smallville, even though you see his father dies in Smallville. He still loves Smallville. There's, right here at the beginning, there's a really great shot that's an homage shot to Action Comics #1, of him lifting the green car, keeping it, from crashing onto the ground. And the shot is followed directly by a line from Superman for All Seasons #1. That is a comic. It was a 4-issue series by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale that covers the 4 seasons of the year. But that #1 issue quote that he uses here is when he talks to the kid, says, "Nice outfit." He says, "Thanks, my mom made it for me." And then gives the boy his hat back and blasts off. Which of course knocks the hat off the boy's head. Oh, Clark. Clark is so pure, so light, so hopeful. And I have to say, after this scene, and you first see Tyler Hoechlin's smile as Superman, I love Henry Cavill as Superman, but I love it even more when he is written as the extremely rounded character that he is. Yes, it is true that Superman has all of this power and chooses to use empathy, overruling the world, which would be super easy for him, but he's also just a simple farm boy who loves simple things, like his mom and his girlfriend and his childhood sweetheart and shit like that. So we saw a tiny bit of that in the Henry Cavill Superman, but in my opinion it wasn't nearly enough. He was a hardened Superman. Superman chooses not to use his powers for evil because of his pure heart, his good heart, and Tyler Hoechlin, I feel like, shows that really well in his genuinely proud, beaming smile. Then he goes into the moment that he and Lois first met. Lois is a character who is, of course, like usual, quick and busy, but when they meet at the paper, they are introduced as, all the best friends that she'll ever have. She clearly likes him, Lois does. As soon as she meets him, they take a moment just to kind of take each other in. I feel like it's not just him looking at her. It goes both ways here. I think they both immediately kind of knew that they were going to fall for one another. I feel like it's actually very clear, watching it in full, that Lois felt the same way looking at him and tried to hide it with her cool demeanor. She knew she would fall for him. He knew he would fall for her. And then it goes right into him immediately revealing his identity to her and then proposing at the Fortress of Solitude. Two very important factors of their relationship that are usually extremely drawn out in whatever media we're working on here. But we got it here in less than 5 minutes. You have this is like the first 2 minutes of the show here still. You get introduction to Superman, how he came to Earth, what makes him Superman, what makes him Clark Kent. You get Lois, you get him revealing himself to Lois, their proposal, and then they have the two sons, The wedding scene actually was really cute. It was like a small country modern wedding, genuinely heartfelt. There was no voiceover. That's something that they do actually a lot in this show. It works out very well. Is they don't do voiceovers during certain parts. They'll just do the music, and that further drives the dramatic effect of the scene by not having somebody talking over it, and you just have this swelling music, this heartfelt music to kind of draw you in. So they have the boys. The boys are twins. Of course, they were brought in, if you are aware, the Infinite Crisis, or I think it's actually Crisis on Infinite Earths is what it was called. That's the one they did, not Infinite Crisis, where it was the crossover from the Arrowverse shows as well as Black Lightning. It pulled the Black Lightning show into the Arrowverse universe and kind of popped a lot of holes in the multiverse, putting people in different places and giving them different lives. And one of the factors that changed was Clark and Lois became married with 2 boys. So now they have the 2 teenage boys. Jordan, he says that in the voiceover, still talking about the his life so far, is that John is the sporty, easy one. Jordan, who is the dark-haired one, has tantrums and night terrors, and he was told he has social anxiety disorder in the past couple of years. So now, where the show actually starts off, he says he's raising teenage boys, married to the most famous journalist in the world, living in Metropolis, trying to make the world a safer place for the people he loves. So a really good intro, covering what might take years of media to cover if they were doing that as part of the plot, as opposed to just laying it all out as this is what his life has been so far. Let's give you this point. The starting point being everything being established. Genius. I think that's the best way they could have taken this. I think that's the saving grace of this show. What makes everything work is that they already have all of these dynamics very well set in. And so we just get on top of that. The show is things that change for their dynamic. And we'll kind of go from there. After that little catch-up, we are now in the current time, where we see General Lane, who, remember, is Lois's father. He sets off the Superman call on a little device, a little sonar thing. The problem that they're having is in a nuclear reactor, which I think is really cool, because it's pretty much always some kind of hostage situation, or a boat going down, or something like this. Much more in-your-face dramatic, not as quite behind the scenes the way this kind of nuclear stuff might be when we get Superman introduced in TV or movies. So what he does to solve the problem, there's a crack in the nuclear thing, and he fixes the crack, and then he freezes a giant chunk of ocean water and carries it like an iceberg over his head to the overheating reactor and drops it in that way, letting the water melt on his way, carrying it down. So it cools slowly and not just like completely causing an even bigger problem. So I think it was a really unique use of, it was a very interesting, unique use of his power set, in my opinion. Showcasing the many things that Superman can do in a possibly different way than we might normally see it in TV or movies. After doing all this, he lands among the soldiers who applaud and all that, and he has a quick word with General Lane. Basically, they're saying that this wasn't an accident. This is the second time this has happened, and it was man-made. So then jump into family talk then, joking about overtime. General Lane and Clark are definitely easy and comfortable around one another. I'm really glad they did not go for the traditional butting heads, father-in-law, son-in-law crap. This is actually very nice to see that they have this very well-developed relationship that is very well kept. So then when Clark gets home, he sees Lois is on the phone, but when she sees him come in, she kind of stops and puts it on her chest and greets him really quickly, including how he needs to apologize to his son Jordan because he missed their therapy session today. And immediately my first thought was, alright, so Lane's comment about overtime wasn't just a joke. Clark really is spending probably too much time as Superman as opposed to with his actual family. So he goes and he checks on his sons. The first room is John's, who of course is the John from the comics. He's based off that John. He's video chatting with a girl named Eliza, and he gives his dad the update that as a incoming freshman, he has already made starting quarterback in the varsity football team. I think it's safe to say he probably has some of that Kryptonian DNA in him, helping them out there. But then he gets into Jordan's room, and he's playing Mortal Kombat with Superman against Raiden in game, which is pretty funny. I keep forgetting, watching this, that they don't know at this point that their dad is Superman. And he's blaring music, which I would say, one maybe kind of critique here is, I feel like a modern kid wouldn't be blaring music, they would be wearing headphones, because it's, more private, more secluded. I wore headphones. And also, I feel like most parents don't want the blaring music. They'd rather have their kids have headphones in, but I don't know, I'm not a parent. I noticed also that Jordan's room has a Foo Fighters Dave Grohl poster, so that was pretty cool. And he makes the comment towards his father how Superman's boring, I'm playing as Raiden. Which is awkward, because he's talking to Superman, he doesn't know it. So that's a really fun thing. It's interesting that they made this kid who they can kind of do whatever they want with. He's not a comic character. So we'll see kind of what that ends up being, if they really made him to do that with, or if they kind of took these two boys and split them, the John Kent in the comics. I don't know. We'll kind of see as it plays out what the roles they're going to be playing, and if there was a reason that they created this character they could do whatever they want with, who was not in the comics. So Clark says that he missed therapy because he was in Wichita for a story, and Jordan cuts him off and fills the rest of it in. He couldn't catch a flight home. Mom already told him. So another awkward moment. He just can't really get a win with Jordan here. Jordan is, kind of brushing him off. And I keep forgetting they don't know their secret. But still, I feel like Superman and Lois, Clark and Lois, could have lied and said that he did catch a flight. Or was it something like he was just really busy? They could have just said he was really busy. The lying thing is, like, you could have just twisted it to make it less specific. I don't know. I'm not a parent, again. But it's nice to see, actually, I would say it's nice to see that Clark and Lois are not, Lois maybe more than Clark being a perfect parent, but they're not perfect parents. Clark definitely has faults here, and his greatest strength is his biggest weakness as a father, and that is him being Superman. So it's very interesting seeing that dynamic and seeing it play out two different ways against two different, very different sons. Two different, very different, you know what I mean. So they, I guess tomorrow is the first day of high school for them, and he tries to give his son a little advice, and Jordan cuts him off again and basically says life's a little different in Smallville than it is in Metropolis. And he's really not able to relate to his sons. And Jordan is aware that his dad is not really able to relate to him, but he doesn't even know how much. Or possibly he doesn't even know how much he can. So Clark basically just says, I'm here to talk if you want to. And Jordan turns on and says, hey, Dad, and gets his hopes up and just turn the music up. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Clark is a loser to his sons. That's kind of funny. So then he gets a call from his mother, and he has to call her back. He missed the call. So we get a call with Martha, and she's telling him that she knows he has a lot on his plate, but he needs to be around more. He has a responsibility to the world as Superman, but even Martha is shutting that down and saying, you have a bigger responsibility to your family. That he needs to show his boys what his father was to him, the same thing, that same love, that same care, that same backbone to the family. He needs to be present in the short time he has left. His boys are about to start high school. He only has a max of 4 years left living with them, assuming that John doesn't get picked up for football as a sophomore, because he's already playing varsity quarterback. That's intense. So she's right. She is obviously, of course, right. He only has a little bit of time left with them. And what he says to this all is that he's trying. He doesn't want to let anybody down. And that's why he doesn't want to pull back being Superman. Because that would not only let down the world, that would let down, of course, General Lane, who is in this, as we find out in a little bit, as General Lane. He's not in this as grandpa or father, which is also very interesting, but fits his character. And once again, Martha comes in with saying life is very different in Smallville than it is, and than their lives are now in Metropolis, and their lives are so much more complicated, reiterating exactly what Jordan said. And the phone call ends, she's not feeling well, and she needs to lie down. The next morning, the three family members are getting ready, Clark, Lois, and John. They're in the family, and Lois mentions something about how Martha had called, and Clark says maybe it's about time to go for a visit. John doesn't like that idea. He mentions that something around the lines of a whole day can take a year in Smallville. So obviously he thinks it's a very small, boring place, as the name would suggest. So then you get Lois kind of tries to step in. You kind of see Clark get a little disappointed in his son feeling that way, and Lois steps in and says, it's not that bad. So then Jordan comes down, and he's dressed basically in, probably somewhat dirty clothes, and the two boys start to argue about their outfits, which seems at the moment to be a very brotherly thing, like standard bully brother thing, just giving each other shit because they're brothers. Lois cuts them off, and they head off, and she gives them hugs on their way out. That leaves Lois and Clark in the kitchen talking about their sons. Lois wants to tell them about their heritage, give them enough advance in case something does happen, and Clark says he doesn't see why they should. He says that's putting too much pressure on them, and Lois brings up, of course, the obvious argument that John clearly has powers. He's about to be starting quarterback at one of the most competitive high schools in the nation as a freshman, and Clark is in clear denial. He says that he thinks it'll make Jordan's situation of anxiety worse, knowing that his brother will have powers and he doesn't. That is the assumption that they're making right now. And so he thinks that it's dangerous for them to know that they're going to also spill the secret, even if they don't have powers, of their dad being Superman. What if they accidentally slip? What if they tell somebody? Lois counters, rightfully so, that it's dangerous more so if they don't know. Something could happen. They could lash out and not realize they're using powers that they don't know they have. And Clark still says he thinks they'll slip up and tell somebody. And it's just a big, kind of argument like that. They kind of seem to be stuck in this back and forth for a good while. So they head into work at the Daily Planet. Things are not the way we saw it in that introductory scene where Clark was introduced to the best people he will ever meet. This scene, there is a little bit more ruffled feathers and chaos. The office does not look like it is in tip-top shape the way it may have once been. People are kind of scattered around the place, panicking. There are more layoffs is what's happening. The company has been bought by this rich guy, and he has been basically changing the paper every way he can, including layoffs. And today, of course, Clark gets fired. They say that he's going to have to start getting new excuses as to why he's gone all the time. Clark says he's just going to lie to the boys and tell them he didn't get fired. Again, the lies are always never the right answer, Clark. You should know this. As somebody who was a super yourself, you should know that lies are not the correct answer. So then his mom calls again, and the scene gets a little intense. His mom calls him at work. He answers the phone, and it's her doctor. There's a moment of silence before he takes off. Now, the doctor answering the phone isn't good news. Whatever she said must have been even worse. So Clark arrives at his family home in Smallville, the farm. When he gets there, he walks into the door and immediately stops and kind of tries to register everything, his senses around him. The doctor walks into the front entry room and sees him there and questions how he got there so quickly, or starts to, at least. And then realizes that doesn't matter, and she moves on. And Clark is still standing there in the doorway. His eyes focused on the doctor for just a moment, and then unfocused again. And she tells him his mother had a stroke. And you see it for a second there. He's listening, is what's happening. It took me a second to realize Clark is listening for his mother's heartbeat, and he doesn't hear it. It was a very, very devastating scene, and actually I would go as far as to say, as thrilling as his smile was at the beginning of the series, and throughout the series, how thrilling and genuine it is how devastating his loss is at this moment. This is I would probably go as far as to say this is the best acted Superman that we've had since Christopher Reeves, and I would say that specifically because of this scene. The moment where he walks into the house, and just immediately stops. He hits the wall of silence. I'm sure he spent his entire life walking into the house and knowing exactly where Ma and Pa Kent were, because he could hear their heartbeats. He could hear the blood rushing through their veins. He could hear the minute adjustments of their bodies in their chairs and everything. And at this moment, Clark walks into his family home and hears nothing. He does not hear his mother's heartbeat. And that moment, that devastation on his face was phenomenal. So he gets, it's the shock. It's somewhere between confusion and terrified. And he just knows that it's too late. He doesn't want to face it, and he does walk into her room, and the scene, you see him walk into the room but not look at the body. He specifically is physically turned his head away from the body, so he's not looking at it, because he knows, he can hear it. He is well aware his mother is dead, but that he won't be real until he sees it. So then, of course, he looks up and sees it, and he cries, and he holds her hand in his, and it's a devastating scene. And that moment of Clark realizing his worst fears, that he can't save the day at every moment, is very, very, it was a very well done scene. Immediately following the scene of his mother's death, there is a small, very pointed montage of other Smallville homes and businesses foreclosing or going out of business with for sale signs and things like that in the front yard. Very pointed until we get up to the point of Martha's funeral. There's no dialogue. It's just the music and the visuals of Smallville literally falling apart at the seams. And then Martha's funeral, and as we see the modern Kent standing at the funeral of Martha Kent, it flashes to a much younger Martha and a much younger Clark at his father's funeral. The same exact funeral plot, probably 25 plus years ago. The music is heartbreaking. It flashes from young Clark to old Clark. Young Clark storming off in absolute sadness, completely can't handle it. And you see old Clark, he has to hold his family up now. And he is on his own. He's lost both parents now. And there's something very, very intimate about having them reminded you that this couple is being buried in the same plot. It's a very intimate thing to be reminded that one parent has died, one grandparent, they died some years ago, and now it's decades later, and the second is finally rejoining them in the same spot. It's a very intimate moment, and it's very dramatic without having any vocals or anything like that, just the visuals of the scene making it very clear and getting the message across of what is happening here. Because what we're seeing in this short clip of scenes is everything that the alien Kal-El built his identity as Clark Kent around, either dying or falling apart. Smallville is losing the battle with the modern era. And, of course, there haven't been active vocals since he walked into the house to find out that his mother is not breathing, adding to the importance, again, of the visuals in these scenes. After the funeral, outside, you see John Kent bringing Jordan Kent some food. He says that it's 1 p.m. and he knows his brother hasn't eaten anything, and Jordan asks, "Who are you, Mom?" And you get this interesting response from Jordan that says, "Someone has to look after you." Very interesting. So the comments on his outfit, directed from John to Jordan, weren't necessarily all brotherly bullshit BSing like I thought. He was actually possibly genuinely concerned over his brother's appearance to others. This also makes it very clear that John sees very, very clearly how their parents backplate Jordan to John. So he's taking care of his twin brother because he sees that his parents are not. And that's a very important thing to remember, I think, and will be hopefully through the rest of the season. Meanwhile, Clark and Lois are talking to another family friend who reports that he had to sell his farm, just more of Smallville falling apart. And in that moment, Clark, of course, hears a voice that he hasn't heard in years and turns to see Lana laying with her family of 2 daughters and her husband. Across the yard, John spots them too and points out the older of Lana's 2 daughters to Jordan, who he refers to as the girl from when we spent the summer here a few years ago. Clearly, Jordan had a bit of a thing with her, and as he flips around to see her, he is obviously enamored. The families gather together and greet each other. The parents head off to get drinks. The kids make small talk, and then they decide the internet router needs to get reset, but it's in the barn where they're not allowed to go, and she says she's in FFA. She'll keep them safe. Meanwhile, in the house, Lois and Clark speak with Lana and her husband. Her husband is a firefighter. And Lana is reporting that everyone she knows in Smallville has left already, which brings her husband to going off about how all these gestures, indiscriminately to Clark and Clark and Lois saying how all these people go off to get these fancy degrees and don't come back to use them in the towns that raise them. Not only is he giving too much credit to an entire town, he is saying that people can't grow up and move on, which I understand Smallville is falling apart. It's not Clark and Lois's fault Smallville's falling apart. There's a lot of other factors that go into a town regressing than its youth moving out. There's a lot more things that can happen in a town. People can still move to that town just because the youths are moving out. It's, world still turns. So anyway, Morgan Edge is the guy who bought the Daily Planet, and I guess he has now been working to buy some land and stuff in Smallville and putting the coal mines back to use. Lois, of course, thinks it's a terrible, terrible idea because he's destroying the Daily Planet, and the firefighter husband counters that the Daily Planet wouldn't be sinking if their reporters could keep their politics to themselves. So you can clearly see what's happening here, how the dynamic relates to modern dynamics of real-life families who split over things like politics and social reform. You can obviously see the small-town thinking versus the progressive thinking. And before he leaves, this firefighter husband of Lana's kindly drops this friendly little tease to the Kent Lanes about how maybe Martha didn't leave the house for them, which obviously is super stressful. Lana says, come by the bank tomorrow, we'll talk about it. After they go, Clark reveals to Lois that he heard his mother say on his flight home just before her death, Clark, it's time, come home. So he believes that his mother had some other reason for him to come back to Smallville than just her death. So at this point, we get the flash back to the barn, what the kids are up to. We get Lana's daughter, Sarah, talking to Jordan. John is already seeing Eliza, so he takes himself off the table, and Sarah asks Jordan for his number and asks him to go out to a party with her later. So she's pretty much asks him out here. It seems obvious, which we learn later is a bit of a miscommunication. But John is seeing Eliza, so he's fine with this. He's proud of his brother. Jordan wants to make himself look really cool, so he decides he's going to climb up to the router, which is, for some reason, pinned way up high at the barn. And he slips, lands on the ground really hard from a very tall height, and the bundle of farm equipment that he kind of was standing on way up high breaks and falls on top of him. We see John leaps in the way to protect him, but we can't really tell what happens beyond that. Sarah calls for help, asking, yelling outside while the boys are laying under all of this metal. And of course it's Clark who runs out to see them under the pile. And I had to think, the run from the house to the barn with everybody watching was probably the longest 10 seconds or so of his life. Because this is Superman, who is running to save the lives, supposedly, he thinks possibly it could be, of his sons, but he can't use his powers until he gets there and he throws the thing off the boys, quick speed, and sees them under there. They're fine. Okay, good. This just brings up more of Lois and Clark talking about needing to tell the boys about the truth of his origin as Kal-El, but Clark is still worried about Jordan, thinking that he isn't the same as John, and that would take it, and that he would take that really, really hard. It's at this time that General Lane chooses to show up to the Clark Kent house, the Kent Lane house, whatever this is, the Kent farm, and he tells Clark what he's found out about the 2 nuclear sites that they have been looking into because of the attacks. The similar things that he found, besides the attacks obviously being from the same person, was minuscule scratching on the cement, I guess, that says, in Kryptonian, you are not a hero, Kal-El. So whoever this is, they know Kryptonian, and they know Clark Kent's name is Kal-El. So Lane and Clark want Superman to go back to check it out, but Lois steps in at this moment and puts her foot down and says no. She says, the world will always need Superman, but right now this family needs you more. General Lane has this little moment with her that he says, Superman doesn't get to have a normal life, no matter how much you want one for him or yourself, which I guess is stuff that he warned her before the wedding, and is very General Lane of him to put his country's needs as he sees it before his own daughters. So, fitting for the character, no matter how frustrating that interaction may be. So the Clark and Lois do go to the bank the next morning to speak with Lana about whatever Martha did. And it turns out Martha did a reverse mortgage of her house to help people in Smallville. Clark knew that she didn't need the money, and so he questions why she did the reverse mortgage, and Lana lays out dozens of cases, or she says she knows of dozens of cases, but lays out several names of families in Smallville who were hurting, who would have had to give things up and, be homeless, whatever it is, if it wasn't for Martha using her reverse mortgage money to help them in their hard times during the real world recession. She apparently saved countless farms and families doing it, and Lois and Clark... Lois and Clark. I feel like I'm saying something wrong historically because, Lewis and Clark, that's what it sounds funny. Lois and Clark, they can't help but see the parallels to his work as Superman and Martha's work as a member of Smallville. And Lana even brings it up as, it's like Lois, your friend that you write about, so Superman. So we have now established that Lana, I'm getting the names mixed up. I don't know why they did Lana Lane and Lois Lane. Lana Lane and Lois Lane, I don't know why they did that. It drives me crazy. That line is what I'm trying to say. Established that Lois and Superman's initial relationship did start with her writing stories about him before she found out that he was Clark. So that was also a nice little side comment she made just to fill in that question of if that was their history, and it is. So Lana tells them that their options now are to either repay the loan or accept a, quote, healthy buyout for the value of the property. And we can guess that that's probably not going to be as healthy as, well, we'll see. So anyway, after the events of the other day, the boys having gone through all of that, but only having gotten concussions, mild concussions at that, they decide to investigate the barn while their parents are gone because Jordan is sure that they're hiding something from them. They find, of course, the hatch that goes below the barn into the cellar, and of course find the spaceship in a, in a admittedly really cool scene. Jordan reaches out to touch it, and it kind of shimmers beneath his touch. It reacts. So he hovers his hand over it again, and a little opening just opens up, a little circle, and it hovers out this little tiny orange rock or something. My first thought was red kryptonite, but there's so much of that wouldn't make sense. So much of that wouldn't make sense. Like, Clark would have been alarmed, and he would have been changed, and just, like, all this other stuff. Anyway, they make a comment about, what is this? I don't know, it's not from Kansas. Ha! The good old joke. So then, now we're getting to the parents and the kids are about to match up with their plot lines. We get the Lois and Clark sitting in their car post-bank visit out in front of the farm, talking about how Lois can smell that the bank loans aren't right because she's got super smell, and Clark jokes that he has super smell too, but he doesn't use it much with 2 teenage boys in the house. Which, I said it really wrong. I said it badly, but it was a really funny joke in context. And it's at that moment that the twins start to approach the car, obviously really angry, and they demand explanations. And here we get the big coming out scene, Clark coming out to his sons as Superman. It's a nice scene, actually. There's not a whole lot of dialogue, once again. He tells them he's Superman, and they basically say, you're joking, you're an idiot. So he takes off his glasses. Lois is ready to take them. She takes them from him. I like that it is as much Clark revealing himself to them as Lois helping him reveal it. So that was a nice little teamwork scene in their marriage to have her as much a part of this as he is. He goes and he lifts the truck, continues to lift it, and flies it high above their heads. And Lois looks at her sons, who are obviously in shock, says, when your father first told me the truth too, I didn't understand either. Again, making her as much of an important part of this reveal as Clark is. And I feel like that's a great thing with marriages are teamwork and partnerships. So I think that's a great thing that they kept that whole thing. This is a partnership even through the odd circumstances that it is. When he gets back down to the ground, Jordan tells his father that he understands now all the times they thought that he was too busy, that they were all too busy for him, there were lies, and they were making him feel like he was crazy for being left out and all this stuff. And Lois busts in and says it has nothing to do with his mental health, which Jordan does ask, how can you know that? Which is it's a question that is worth asking. How do we know that their Kryptonian DNA did not give them the personalities and mental health from birth the way that they have it. Who knows? Maybe we'll see that kind of explored further in the series. Clark explains that he's the one who didn't want to burden them with the knowledge of the powers, or even worse, if only one of them had the powers. And once again, Jordan says he understands. His dad thinks that they only survived that incident in the barn yesterday because of John, and they makes a comment referring to John as Superboy before storming off, which is funny because in the comics he is Superboy. What's also interesting, though, is when Clark tries to go after Jordan, John is the one to step in the way and tells him, "Leave us alone." It's interesting that John, the way that Lois and Clark are using their marriage as a partnership to talk about this stuff with their sons are using their brotherhood as a partnership to protect one another from possibly their parents. I think it's an interesting dynamic that the two of them back each other over everything else is kind of what it seems when it comes down to it, over everything else. So that's very interesting. After all of this, Lois and Clark are talking again, and regarding the recent kind of turmoil in their lives, she says to him, "Your life falling apart doesn't mean you're special, it means you're human." Which is, oh gosh, I want that as a poster. Really good line again. And then Clark hears about another call at a nuclear breach. Lois says he's alright, sends him off. He goes to see what's up with this nuclear stuff again. When Clark gets to the nuclear facility, he actually starts addressing directly whoever he thinks it is that is doing this stuff to the facilities, causing them to melt down. And he's correct, the person is there, and they do speak back to him, they respond, but they're hiding behind the lead walls of the facility where he can't see them. So that's another thing they know, is they know his weaknesses as much as they know what he can do and who he is. So clearly he's been doing all this so that he can watch Superman, and see what he does to save the facilities, alter his own, plan or whatever based on what he sees Superman do, while all the while Superman can't even see that he's there. So finally, while walking through the building, he finally gets a glimpse of him and crashes through the walls to attack him. It's some dude in a big metal suit, and they're pretty much head to head. They have the same kind of abilities between the suit and Clark. Clark can't kill the suit. The suit can certainly beat him up, but it's not something that's going to be easy for either one of them. Meanwhile, Jordan has gone off to the party that his friend Sarah invited him to, and she greets him at the party, and they start talking. They have a moment where she tells him about how the town has this sort of darkness that comes over them, like a depression, and people act like you can catch it like the flu. She says that her dad, it came to her house, and now her dad sleeps on the couch half the time, and he sees the dark side of the town because he's a firefighter. And she says that he sees things like parents cooking meth and burning down the house that their kids are still inside. So clearly Smallville has more problems than even the Kents know about. Smallville has modernized in the wrong way. And she adds that she herself took a handful of her mom's pills a year ago trying to kill herself, is what we're led to believe there. She says she doesn't know why she did it, still has no idea why she did it. But she says her mom made a drama about it all, had her see therapy and all this other stuff. And of course, this brings Jordan to feel much closer to her based on his own experiences. And he tries to kiss her. Well, he does kiss her, and she's very surprised. And then her boyfriend shows up and grabs him and starts beating on him. And my question here is, Sarah, why didn't you mention that when you were giving his phone number, when you were asking for his phone number and inviting him to a party with you, why didn't you mention that wasn't a date? Because it sounded pretty date-like to me. So this is obviously not a good situation. He's now getting beaten up, and John shows up and actually just ends up getting in the fight too. So the two of them are now in a fight with two dudes. So teenagers, as they do. And then meanwhile, already far, far away from the reactor where the problem started, Superman is busy with his own fight, chasing down the guy in the Iron Man type suit, crashing into the small Chinatown businesses, which I definitely think that we're going to look into the destruction of Superman, and Superman being, quote, a menace, J. Jonah Jameson, to Metropolis, because they definitely had him act aloof to the terror and destruction that the people were reacting to around the building. He crushes the front of this tiny little Chinatown business, and then just kind of like stumbles out of it, wipes himself off, and flies off. It was something that you would expect to see in The Boys, not in Superman. But I have to kind of feel then they did that on purpose, and we're going to get more talk on Superman being a bit of a problem for really anywhere that he is. While Superman is still flying above Earth in this fight, Jordan is breaking away from his attacker in the fight at the beach or whatever it is. It's not the beach, it's a mine, that's what it is, the fight at the mine. And he is kind of crippled there on the ground, and so he's watching from the ground as John gets kicked in the gut. And until a wild climax, you see Jordan's eyes brighten up red, and he blasts the guy away with heat vision. Confirmed, Jordan Kent has Kryptonian powers, not John. Well, not confirmed that either, but at least Jordan. Meanwhile, Clark is getting stabbed with kryptonite. The Vision obviously knows so much about him, but they've never met, so this is definitely a problem. And Clark is now being stabbed with kryptonite. Lois, back at the farm, is trying to track down some information for the bank, but meanwhile, on the TV, she sees the party that the kids are at, and how the cops had to be called there because of a big old fire. And she goes in, she uses the same sonic device that her dad has to call Superman, and she sits there and she whispers, "Please, Clark, please," and he's falling to earth. He's stabbed in the chest, but he can still hear her voice. It gives him enough strength to pull out the kryptonite shard from his chest, barely saving himself from landing on some poor dude's car, still in Chinatown. I kind of wonder if they're going to talk about possibly if Superman is a lot... I feel like this is going to be a stretch, but maybe they're going to go into, like, the reverse gentrification of Superman's attacks. Does he let himself be more destructive if it's a low-income neighborhood? Because that was 2 different times now we've seen him destroy and almost destroy Chinatown. So, interesting that they've done that twice. I wonder if they're going to make a point about that. So with the family back to being safe at home, it's revealed that Jordan is the one who saved the 2 boys in the barn. He says as soon as he hit the ground, he felt this big wave come over him like control. And when John came to protect him, he actually flipped the 2 of them over, so he was the one who took the brunt of the falling equipment. But here we have Clark saying now that Jordan's powers are manifesting very, very different than his, so he's not really sure how to handle it still. But he does admit that he should have told them a long time ago, which is good because, duh! Lois was right, man, you should have listened to your wife, but thank God nobody was hurt. So, to wrap it all up, Clark and Lois speak about what he thinks his mom wanted him to do to Smallville. Lois obviously thinks that there's something else going on about these loans. Clark thinks that that his mom actually wanted them to move to Smallville, to be a part of a community and to help the community. Later on, Clark goes outside to speak with Jordan about his own father, apologizing not being there for him, but saying that he will be there now. I can't help but wonder if Jordan feels like the only reason his dad cares now is because of the powers and not because of who he is as his son, which is still something that he's got to watch out for. That's something that can really mess with your kids' heads. And then the next day, I guess, Lois and Clark are speaking to Lana about staying instead of selling the farm, and they inform her that her bank was secretly purchased by Morgan Edge, the same guy who was buying up the mines, the same guy who bought the Daily Planet newspaper. It was all secretly purchased by Morgan Edge just before those loans were offered. So Lana asks why somebody like Morgan Edge would care about family farms in Smallville, Kansas, and the Kents look at each other and say they don't know. That was kind of their point. They'd like to find out. Jordan apologizes to Sarah for having kissed her. In my opinion, she should be apologizing she does apologize for the miscommunication. Thank goodness she's not that stupid to realize that she basically asked you out. She says she just wanted to hang out after seeing him take his medication during his grandmother's funeral because she could relate to him and didn't feel so alone for being messed up. Personally, I am against medicating people under a certain age. I feel like if there are other ways to do it without putting chemicals to mess up their brains or their bodies, don't give them the chemicals if you can help it. But there's obviously exclusions. So Jordan promises to keep her secret, and she promises to, not be weird or whatever. In the end of the episode, Jordan and John talk about how the powers that Jordan has, but maybe John doesn't, and John jokes that it proves to him the thing that he knew all along, that his skills on the field are legit. So then we get the final scene. That was a nice heartwarming ending, but of course there has to be this final scene where we see this person who was in the suit. He arrives at his base, big reveal, takes off the helmet. Lex Luthor is a black man, bitches! Woo! This is something me and my husband were talking about for a long time, because there are several animated Superman properties and DC properties in general where Lex Luthor is animated to look like a black man. I swear to you not. This man is animated to look like a black man. They just lightened his skin to make him look a little bit whiter. I swear to God, they designed him as a black man in those shows and movies. But so now we're finally getting a black Lex Luthor. So what's interesting about Lex Luthor being in this is we already have a Lex Luthor in the Arrowverse who we met in Supergirl. Basically, this Luthor was brought in during the crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths, the same event that gave Clark and Lois their sons and added Black Lightning to the Arrowverse. Since we already know this is not the Lex Luthor of this world, and he spoke to Clark about how his world was destroyed, it's easy to make the assumption that he's one of the survivors of the worlds that Anti-Monitor destroyed in that Crisis events, and then the remnants of those worlds that got clumped together with this one. So it's a big, big start to Superman and Lois's premiere. I really, really enjoyed this far more than I expected. I feel like this is a very interesting take on Superman and Clark Kent and Kal-El, whichever name you want him to go by. All around, just a wonderful take on him as a character. He is a fluid, dynamic, round character, and I'm glad to be seeing multiple aspects of his personality, even ones that go against each other, because he is raised by humans, and he's going to have those human traits of, lying to people, going back on his word, doing things like that we kind of all fall into those traps. So I'm really interested to see how his very modern, relatable Earth family with some super people involved are going to evolve through the season, and how this Lex Luthor is going to evolve as a villain. The next episode of Superman and Lois will premiere on the CW tomorrow, Tuesday the 2nd of March, I do believe, and it should be available on the CW app the next day, I think the 3rd. So make sure you check it out if you are at all interested in anything you heard me talk about on this episode. Otherwise, this is just a special edition podcast episode for Sensational She-Geek Live at Yancy Street. I will be back with a standard episode on Friday. It will be episode 7B, covering the comics that come out tomorrow and Wednesday the 3rd, and what I really enjoyed about them or didn't. In the meantime, stay sweaty and have an excellent week, and do something nerdy for me this week.